Sometimes the loudest voices come from the quietest moments. When an elderly woman faced silent discrimination at a fine dining restaurant, no one expected that her presence would unveil hidden biases and spark a lesson no one would forget. This is more than a story. It's a reminder that respect knows no age or background. Let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe kindness should be served to everyone, like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. The late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of Willow and Finch, an upscale restaurant in Atlanta known for its modern decor and impeccable service. Soft piano music drifted through the air as well-dressed patrons chatted over sparkling glasses of wine and artfully plated meals. Waiters moved swiftly between tables, their polished shoes silent against the marble floors. As the entrance door swung open, the gentle chime above it barely caught anyone's attention. An elderly black woman stepped inside, her steps slow but steady, each one deliberate. Valerie Monroe, now in her early 70s, exuded a quiet grace. She wore a tailored navy blue coat with delicate embroidery at the cuffs, and a pearl necklace that rested just below the collar of her crisp white blouse. A small black handbag was tucked securely under her arm. Though age had softened her features, her dark eyes held a quiet strength that had never wavered. The hostess at the front, a young woman with a bright smile, glanced up from her podium. That smile faltered ever so slightly, though she quickly recovered. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone polite but lacking warmth. "Yes," Valerie replied with a soft smile, "under the name Mrs. Monroe." The hostess scanned the reservation list, her brows raising slightly in surprise when she found the name. She nodded quickly. "Right this way." Valerie followed her through the bustling restaurant, past tables where lively conversations paused momentarily as eyes flicked her way. She noticed, but didn't let it show. It wasn't the first time she had felt out of place in a setting like this. The hostess stopped at a table near the kitchen, far from the best seats, but Valerie said nothing. She simply took her seat, placed her handbag gently on the chair beside her, and opened the menu. Moments passed, then several more. No waiter approached. Valerie glanced around, noticing a young couple who had arrived after her, already being served appetizers. A table of businessmen, laughing loudly, had their drinks refilled twice. She sighed softly but remained composed, folding her hands neatly on the table. At last, a waiter approached. He was tall, with neatly combed dark hair and a well-pressed uniform. His name tag read, Ethan. His smile was thin, barely there, and his tone carried a forced politeness that felt hollow. "Sorry for the wait," he said briskly. "We're a bit busy right now. I'll be back to take your order." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. Valerie nodded to herself, her expression calm, but her heart sinking slightly. She wasn't unfamiliar with this kind of treatment. The subtle dismissal, the quiet disrespect that wasn't loud enough to be called out but loud enough to be felt. Still, she had learned long ago that grace was often her most powerful tool. She waited patiently, but the minutes stretched endlessly. The soft clinking of glasses and the low murmur of conversations filled the room. But at Valerie's table, there was only silence. Her water glass remained empty, and no one seemed in a hurry to change that. Across the room, a man in his late 30s sat at a table near the bar. His tailored navy suit and crisp white shirt blended seamlessly with the restaurant's upscale clientele, but his sharp eyes were locked on Valerie's table. His fingers tapped lightly against his glass as he observed the scene unfold. This man was Marcus Monroe, Valerie's son, and the owner of Willow and Finch. Marcus watched as Ethan walked past his mother's table again, without so much as a glance in her direction. His jaw clenched tightly. He had built this restaurant from the ground up, pouring every ounce of his ambition and hard work into making it one of the most respected establishments in the city, and the woman sitting alone near the kitchen, being quietly ignored, was the very reason he had succeeded. His mother had taught him everything about perseverance, respect, and integrity. She had worked multiple jobs to support him through college, always reminding him that dignity wasn't something given. It was earned. Now, watching her endure such blatant disregard in the place he had built with her values in mind felt like a personal betrayal. But Marcus wasn't the type to react impulsively. Years in the competitive restaurant industry had taught him the power of patience. He leaned back in his chair, signaling subtly to Andrea, the restaurant manager, who immediately approached. "Keep an eye on table 14, Marcus said quietly, nodding toward his mother's table. I want to see how Ethan handles this." Andrea's eyes flicked to the table, understanding dawning quickly. She gave a small nod and stepped back, blending into the restaurant's seamless rhythm. Valerie glanced at her watch, her expression unchanged. She wasn't one to complain. She believed that how you responded to unfairness often said more about you than about the person being unfair. But Marcus knew better. He knew that no amount of grace should excuse mistreatment. Ethan finally approached her table again, but his tone remained dismissive. "Still need more time to decide?" he asked, barely concealing his impatience. Valerie looked up, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm ready to order whenever you're available." "Right, I'll be back," Ethan muttered, already turning away. That was it for Marcus. He stood, his movements calm but deliberate, and crossed the room. The moment his polished shoes touched the marble near Ethan, the waiter's casual demeanor shifted. "Marcus?" Ethan stammered, startled. "I didn't know you were here." "I've been here," Marcus replied, his voice steady and quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority. "And I've been watching." Ethan's eyes flicked nervously to Valerie's table and back. "Watching what?" "Watching you ignore my mother, who has been sitting there for 30 minutes without so much as a glass of water," Marcus said, each word measured and sharp. Ethan paled. "Your mother?" "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "The woman you've treated as an inconvenience all evening." The room grew silent, conversations halted, forks paused mid-air, and even the pianist's fingers hovered over the keys. Ethan opened his mouth, but Marcus cut him off. "Save it, there's no excuse." He turned to Andrea. "Take over table 14. Make sure she gets everything she needs." Andrea nodded quickly and rushed to Valerie's side, her voice apologetic as she poured water and offered a sincere apology. Marcus faced Ethan once more. "We'll discuss your future here later. For now, you're done for the day. Go home." Ethan's shoulders slumped in humiliation. He untied his apron and left quietly, the heavy door swinging shut behind him. Marcus walked over to his mother's table and crouched beside her chair, his stern expression softening into one of concern. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked quietly. Valerie smiled gently, placing her hand over his. "I'm fine, Marcus. You handled that well." "I should have stepped in sooner," he murmured. "No," Valerie replied softly. "You let him reveal his character. Sometimes that's more powerful." And in that moment, Marcus realized that even amidst the injustice, his mother's strength and grace would always be the loudest voice in the room. As the gentle hum of Willow and Finch settled back into its familiar rhythm, Valerie Monroe sat quietly at her table, her eyes distant as memories stirred within her. The soft clink of silverware and the quiet murmur of conversations faded into the background as she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Her thoughts drifted back to a different time, decades ago, when she was a young woman navigating a world that often dismissed her because of her skin color. Back then, it wasn't unusual to be ignored in restaurants or overlooked in stores, but Valerie had always held her head high. She believed that dignity wasn't something others gave you. It was something you carried within yourself. She thought of her late husband, Charles, whose laughter had once filled their modest home. Together, they had built a life with little more than love, hard work, and endless dreams for their only son, Marcus. Charles had always said, "One day, our boy will make us proud, Val. Just wait and see." And he had been right. Raising Marcus wasn't easy. Valerie worked long hours as a seamstress during the day and cleaned offices at night. There were days when exhaustion threatened to break her, but the image of Marcus walking across a college graduation stage kept her going. She remembered saving every spare dollar to help him through school, even when it meant going without herself. Her mind lingered on one particular memory, the day Marcus received his acceptance letter to culinary school. His excitement had been contagious, his eyes sparkling with dreams too big for their small living room. Valerie had hugged him tightly, whispering, "Make them see you, baby. Make them see your worth." But dreams often came with challenges. Marcus had faced his own share of discrimination in the culinary world. She remembered the late-night phone calls when he vented about being overlooked for promotions or being told he wasn't the right fit for certain kitchens. Still, he never gave up. Valerie's voice was always in his ear, reminding him that hard work would always shine through. Her thoughts snapped back to the present as she glanced around the restaurant her son had built. Marcus had done more than just succeed. He had thrived. Willow and Finch wasn't just a restaurant. It was a testament to perseverance, a place where excellence was expected and delivered. And yet, even in this space, moments like tonight reminded Valerie that some battles were far from over. She thought of Ethan's dismissive tone and the subtle way he had made her feel invisible. It wasn't the first time she had experienced something like this, and deep down, she knew it wouldn't be the last. But tonight felt different, not because of the mistreatment, but because of what came after. Marcus, her son, had seen it, and he had acted. Valerie's mind drifted to her early days with Ryan Monroe, her husband. Back then, they had dreamed of a world where their children wouldn't have to face the same battles they had. But reality often painted a different picture. She recalled the stories her own mother used to tell, about sitting at segregated lunch counters, about fighting for basic respect. Valerie had grown up believing that every generation had to push the line a little further so that the next one could stand a little taller. Tonight, she realized, Marcus had pushed that line further. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am, may I fill your water glass?" Valerie looked up to see Andrea, the manager, standing there with a gentle smile and sincere eyes. Valerie nodded, and Andrea quickly poured the water, her voice low as she apologized once more. "I'm so sorry about earlier," Andrea whispered. "It shouldn't have happened." Valerie offered a small, forgiving smile. "It's not the first time, dear," she said softly. "But thank you." Andrea's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It shouldn't happen at all." As Andrea walked away, Valerie's gaze settled on Marcus, who stood at the bar, watching her carefully. She thought of the quiet strength he had inherited from his father and the unwavering resilience he had learned from her. She remembered all the times she had told him that the world would try to make him feel small, but he was never to let it succeed. "Make them see you." Her whispered words from years ago echoed in her mind, and tonight Marcus had made sure everyone saw her. But Valerie wasn't naive. She knew the world was full of people like Ethan, people who thought respect was conditional. Yet, she also knew that for every Ethan, there was someone like Marcus, someone willing to stand up and say, "Not here, not today." Her heart ached as she remembered all the times she had quietly accepted mistreatment in her younger years. Not because she lacked courage, but because the world then didn't always allow for resistance. Tonight, though, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the world had changed just enough for moments like these to matter. As Valerie sipped her water, she made a silent promise to herself. "I will not let this moment pass unnoticed. My son stood for me today. Tomorrow, I will stand for someone else." Across the room, Marcus felt his mother's gaze on him. He smiled softly, knowing that tonight wasn't just about a waiter's poor behavior. It was about something much bigger. A reminder that even in the spaces they built, the fight for respect never truly ended. The hushed murmur of conversations settled back into a quiet hum as Valerie Monroe gently set down her water glass, her heart still steady despite the storm that had just passed. She felt the weight of the moment, but more than that, she felt the weight of years past pressing against her chest. Across the room, Marcus watched her closely. His mother had always been the embodiment of grace, never raising her voice, never demanding attention, but commanding respect through her quiet strength. Tonight, though, he had seen something different, a flicker of weariness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before, and it broke him. Valerie, seated alone at her corner table, reflected on the lifetime that had brought her to this moment. She thought back to her childhood in rural Georgia, where her father had worked the fields and her mother had scrubbed floors in the big houses across town. They never had much, but they had each other, and they had dignity. Valerie had learned young that the world would not always be kind, but kindness was something she could always give, even when it wasn't returned. Her first brush with discrimination had come when she was just a little girl. She still remembered the sting of being turned away from a diner after a long day at school. She had clutched her mother's hand tightly, too young to understand why they couldn't sit inside like everyone else. Her mother had simply smiled down at her and whispered, "One day, baby, they'll have to see us." But the world had changed slower than her mother's hopes. Even as Valerie grew into a young woman, earning her way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, she felt the constant hum of being underestimated. Employers praised her work, but rarely promoted her. Neighbors were polite but distant. And yet, she persevered. Meeting Charles Monroe had been a bright spot in those years. He saw her, not just as a pretty face, but as a woman with dreams and ambition. Together, they built a life filled with love, laughter, and silent sacrifices. Charles worked long shifts at the factory, while Valerie sewed late into the night, all to give their son, Marcus, a better future. Her thoughts lingered on Marcus's childhood, the scraped knees, the late-night homework sessions, the whispered bedtime stories of heroes who looked like him, fighting battles that were never fair but always necessary. She had raised him to believe that respect wasn't optional, even when the world tried to deny him his. Marcus's mind flashed back to his early days in the culinary world, the extra shifts he wasn't paid for, the promotions he was passed over for, the casual comments that cut deeper than they should have. He had stayed silent for so long, fearing that speaking up would only cost him more. But tonight was different. Tonight, he hadn't just been a bystander, he had acted. Yet, the weight of silence still pressed down on him. For every Ethan exposed, how many more were left unchecked? How many more quiet moments of disrespect went unnoticed every day? And how many times had his mother faced them alone? Valerie, sensing her son's unrest even from across the room, gave him a small nod. It was a gesture Marcus knew well, a silent reassurance, a reminder that she was okay, that she had faced worse and survived. But Marcus wasn't okay. He stood up, drawing a few curious glances from nearby tables. With deliberate steps, he approached Valerie's table and took the seat across from her. "You didn't have to do that," Valerie said softly, her voice filled with both gratitude and worry. Marcus shook his head. "Yes, I did." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I'm proud of you, but you can't carry this anger forever, baby." "It's not anger, Mom," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's exhaustion." Valerie nodded slowly, understanding all too well. "I know," she whispered, "but exhaustion can't break us." The room seemed to fade away as mother and son sat in shared silence, each lost in their own thoughts but bound by an unspoken understanding. Valerie thought of all the battles she had fought silently, and Marcus thought of all the battles still to come. As Valerie finished her dessert, Marcus made a quiet decision. Tonight wasn't just about Ethan or this one incident. It was about every moment like this, past and future, and he wasn't going to let them slide anymore. Before leaving, Valerie paused at the entrance, glancing back at her son, who now stood behind the bar, lost in thought. She smiled softly, knowing that her fight had become his, and while it pained her, it also gave her hope. The world hadn't changed overnight, but tonight it had taken one small step. The night air outside Willow and Finch was cool against Valerie Monroe's skin as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She exhaled slowly, gathering herself before beginning her walk home. It had been a long evening, one filled with unspoken tensions and quiet revelations. Inside the restaurant, however, the storm was still brewing. Marcus Monroe stood behind the bar, his hands gripping the smooth wood surface as he processed everything that had transpired. The hum of conversation had returned, but there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. The waitstaff moved with a cautious attentiveness, avoiding eye contact with the bar's owner, as if afraid to cross his simmering frustration. The manager, Andrea, approached him hesitantly. "Marcus, about earlier," she started, her voice careful. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "What about it?" She sighed, folding her arms. "I should have stepped in sooner." "Yes, you should have," he agreed without hesitation. Andrea bit her lip, guilt flickering across her face. "Look, I know Ethan's behavior was unacceptable, and we'll deal with that. But it's more than just him, isn't it?" Marcus studied her for a long moment. Andrea had been with him since the early days of the restaurant, back when it was just an idea scribbled on napkins, fueled by long hours and an unwavering dream. She was a good manager, capable, organized, but she had missed something fundamental tonight. "It is more than just him," Marcus finally said. "It's about the culture we're creating here." Andrea nodded. "I get it, and I want to help fix it." Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "Then we start by making sure this never happens again." Andrea hesitated before pulling out her phone. "There's something else," she said carefully. "You're going to want to see this." She turned the screen toward him, revealing a social media post, one that had already gained traction. "Sat in a restaurant tonight and watched a well-dressed elderly woman get ignored for over half an hour while everyone else got top-tier service. She didn't make a scene, didn't raise her voice, she just waited. And the only reason it changed? The owner saw what was happening. The owner who happened to be her son. It was ugly to watch. And it makes you wonder, how often does this happen when no one's watching? Marcus's stomach tightened. The post had already been shared dozens of times, the comments filled with outrage. "Great," he muttered, rubbing his temple. "So now, this isn't just a problem, it's a public problem." Andrea gave him a small, knowing look. "It was always a problem, Marcus. Now, people are just paying attention." He exhaled slowly. She was right. He had spent years trying to build a restaurant that stood for excellence, for inclusion, for quality. But tonight had exposed a crack in that foundation. And cracks could break everything if left unchecked. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, the weight of the previous night still hanging over him. He had barely slept, replaying every moment in his head. He walked into the dining area, his mind already working on how to address the issue. The first step was clear. He needed to talk to Ethan. By the time Ethan arrived, the restaurant was still empty, save for Andrea and a few early morning kitchen staff. He walked in cautiously, his usual cocky demeanor dampened by the events of the previous night. "Marcus," he started, his voice uneasy. "Sit," Marcus instructed, gesturing to a nearby table. Ethan obeyed, his shoulders tense. Marcus sat across from him, folding his hands. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer." Ethan swallowed hard. "Okay." Marcus met his eyes. "Why?" Ethan's gaze flickered toward the floor. I don't know, man. It wasn't personal." Marcus let out a humorless laugh. "It wasn't personal? You ignored my mother for 30 minutes while treating everyone else like royalty. So explain to me, Ethan. If it wasn't personal, what was it?" Ethan fidgeted. I guess I assumed she wasn't really our usual clientele, you know? I thought maybe she wandered in by mistake, like she wouldn't be able to afford it." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You thought she didn't belong." Ethan hesitated. "I didn't mean it like that." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "You meant it exactly like that. And the worst part? You never even questioned it. You just assumed." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I messed up. I get that. But I didn't mean to offend anyone." Marcus exhaled, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Intent doesn't erase impact, Ethan. You need to understand that." Ethan nodded, shame creeping into his expression. Marcus studied him for a moment before making his decision. "You're done here?" Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, Marcus." "You're not a bad waiter, Ethan," Marcus interrupted. "But this isn't about being a good waiter. It's about being a decent person. And last night, you failed at that. I can't have someone working here who makes people feel unwelcome in a space I built for everyone." Ethan slumped back in his chair, defeated. Marcus stood. "You can collect your things. Andrea will handle the paperwork." Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. He knew there was no use arguing. As Ethan left the restaurant for the last time, Marcus watched him go, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. One problem had been dealt with, but the larger issue, the one about the culture within his restaurant, was far from over. Later that day, Marcus gathered his entire staff for a meeting. The dining room was filled with servers, chefs, and bartenders, all wearing a mix of expressions, some tense, some curious. He stood at the front of the room, his hands in his pockets. "Last night," he began, "something happened here that shouldn't have." Silence fell. Some of you saw it, some of you didn't. But here's the bottom line. This restaurant was built on a foundation of respect. And when one of our own disrespects a guest, that foundation cracks. A few people nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "So things are going to change," Marcus continued. "Starting today, we're implementing new training on customer treatment and unconscious bias. And if anyone here has an issue with that, you know where the door is." No one moved. "Because here's the thing," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Willow and Finch isn't just about fine dining. It's about experience. It's about making sure everyone who walks through that door leaves feeling valued." A few staff members exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Andrea stepped forward. "We're also creating an anonymous reporting system. If you see something, if you feel something's wrong, you can speak up. No more brushing things under the rug." There was a beat of silence, then a murmur of approval. Marcus exhaled, finally allowing himself to breathe. This wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start. As the meeting ended and staff dispersed, Andrea leaned in. "You think this'll be enough?" Marcus looked around the restaurant, the place he had built, the place he refused to let be tainted by prejudice. "No," he admitted, "but it's the first step." He glanced at the doorway, picturing his mother standing there, watching, waiting. This was for her, and for everyone like her who had ever walked into a place meant to be welcoming, only to be treated like they didn't belong. But that was going to change. The hum of the restaurant buzzed quietly in the background as Marcus Monroe leaned back in his office chair, scrolling through social media posts that had exploded overnight. The story about his mother's mistreatment at Willow and Finch had gone viral, sparking heated discussions about discrimination, respect, and integrity in the hospitality industry. Unbelievable that this still happens in 2025. Respect costs nothing. Willow and Finch needs to do better. Kudos to the owner for stepping up, but this should never have happened. This is why representation matters. The quiet strength of that woman and her son's response gave me chills. Marcus sighed. He appreciated the support, but each comment also served as a harsh reminder of how easily prejudice could seep into places meant to feel welcoming. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Andrea. "Hey," he answered, rubbing his temple. "Marcus, we found something," Andrea said, her voice laced with tension. "You need to come down to the storeroom." Marcus frowned, but didn't ask questions. He grabbed his keys and made his way through the quiet restaurant, still closed for prep hours. When he reached the storeroom, Andrea was waiting with a file in her hand. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the file, her expression grim. "I started looking through staff reports after last night. I found this from 2 months ago, filed anonymously." Marcus opened the file, his eyes scanning the report. Observed waiter Ethan consistently avoiding tables with elderly patrons and customers of color. Made jokes with other staff about knowing who will tip well. Marcus's grip tightened around the pages. This was reported 2 months ago?" Andrea nodded. "I don't know how we missed it, or maybe we ignored it, but whoever wrote it tried to sound the alarm." Marcus's jaw clenched. "And we didn't listen?" Andrea shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Marcus. We need to find out who wrote this." Marcus nodded. "We will, but first, we need to deal with the bigger picture." That afternoon, Marcus called a private meeting with the senior staff, including Andrea and the head chef, Luis. As they gathered in the small conference room, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. "All right," Marcus began, placing the anonymous report on the table. "We have a problem, and it's bigger than Ethan." Luis raised an eyebrow. "Bigger how?" Andrea spoke up. "Someone noticed Ethan's behavior months ago and reported it. We didn't take action." The room fell silent. Luis shook his head. "How did we miss this?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, "but we need to figure it out, and we need to make sure it never happens again." Andrea cleared her throat. "I've already started reviewing past complaints and reports. We need to set up a system that ensures nothing like this slips through the cracks again." Marcus nodded. "Agreed, but we also need to address the culture here. I refuse to let this place become known for discrimination." Luis leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" Marcus exhaled. "We start with transparency. I'm going to address this head-on with the staff. Then, we bring in training for everyone, mandatory. And I mean everyone, from the waitstaff to management." Andrea nodded. "And we find out who filed this report. Whoever they are, they cared enough to say something. We need more people like that." Later that evening, Marcus called a full staff meeting. The employees gathered in the dining area, murmuring among themselves. The incident from the night before still lingered in everyone's minds. Marcus stood at the front, his gaze steady. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he began. "What happened last night was unacceptable, and it wasn't just about one person's actions. It's about the culture we've allowed to grow here." The room fell silent. "I found a report from 2 months ago," Marcus continued. "Someone here noticed the problem long before last night, and we missed it. That's on me, but from now on, things will be different." Andrea stepped forward. "We're implementing mandatory training on unconscious bias and respectful service, and we're setting up an anonymous system for reporting any concerns." Luis added, "This isn't optional. It's about making sure everyone feels welcome here." Marcus's gaze swept the room. "If anyone here has a problem with that, you can leave now." No one moved. "Good," Marcus said. Because this isn't just about business, it's about people. After the meeting, as staff dispersed, Andrea approached Marcus. We still need to find the person who filed that report. Marcus nodded. We will. The next morning, Marcus found an anonymous note on his desk. It read simply, I filed the report. I didn't know if it would matter. I'm glad it finally does. There was no signature, but Marcus smiled faintly. Someone had seen the cracks long before they became a fracture, and now he was determined to repair them, brick by brick, person by person, for his mother, for his restaurant, for everyone who walked through those doors. This chapter explores the deeper issue behind Ethan's actions, introduces an anonymous whistleblower, and sets Marcus on a mission to transform the restaurant's culture from within. Let me know when you're ready for the next chapter. Here's the detailed text for Chapter 6 of your story, maintaining emotional depth and narrative flow. The next morning, Marcus Monroe stood in his restaurant's quiet dining area, lost in thought. The previous night's confrontation with Ethan still echoed in his mind. His mother's calm face, Ethan's discomfort, and the silent stares from the diners. It was all still fresh, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Andrea approached him with her tablet in hand. Morning, Marcus. I have the contact for a training consultant. They specialize in diversity and inclusion for hospitality businesses. Marcus nodded, appreciating Andrea's proactive approach. Set up a meeting for this week. She hesitated. There's something else. Ethan called. He wants to meet. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Meet? After everything? He said he has something to say, something important. Marcus considered it for a moment. Fine, set it up. I want to hear what he has to say, though I'm not sure I'll believe it. That afternoon, Ethan walked into Willow and Finch, his face pale and his usual cocky demeanor gone. Marcus waited for him in a small private room near the back. Andrea sat beside him, ready to document everything. Ethan sat down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I wanted to apologize. Marcus leaned forward, arms crossed. Apologize? After what you did to my mother? After what you did to our guests? Ethan looked down. I messed up, I know that, but there's more you should know. Andrea's eyes narrowed. More? Ethan swallowed hard. I wasn't the only one. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? There's a group, Ethan admitted. A few of the staff. They have this mindset. They think certain customers don't deserve the same service, especially older folks, people of color, people who don't fit the image they want for the restaurant. Marcus clenched his fists. You mean to tell me this wasn't just you? Ethan nodded. Yeah, I mean, I played along, but I wasn't the one who started it. Andrea's voice was sharp. Who then? Ethan hesitated. I'm scared, okay? I'm already losing my job. I don't need more enemies. Marcus's voice softened, but only slightly. Ethan, if you want any chance at redeeming yourself, you need to tell me everything. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. There's a server named Kyle. He's the one who started it. Said he wanted the restaurant to be exclusive. He encouraged us to avoid certain tables or give them slower service. Marcus felt a pang of betrayal. Kyle had been with them for years. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Andrea asked. Because I was part of it, Ethan admitted, and Kyle made sure we all kept quiet. Marcus exhaled, the weight of the revelation heavy on his shoulders. Thank you for telling me, but don't think this erases what you did. Ethan nodded. I know. That evening, Marcus gathered the staff for an emergency meeting. Kyle stood near the back, arms crossed, an indifferent expression on his face. Marcus wasted no time. I've been made aware of something disturbing, he began, his eyes scanning the room. There's been a deliberate effort by some staff to discriminate against certain guests. The room went still. I won't tolerate this, Marcus continued, his voice sharp. If you're part of this, come forward now. Silence. Then Kyle spoke, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Are we really doing this, Marcus? Not everyone can afford to eat here. Isn't it better if we keep up a certain standard? Marcus's eyes locked on Kyle. A standard based on prejudice? Kyle shrugged. Call it what you want. Andrea stepped forward. Kyle, we know you've been encouraging staff to discriminate. We have proof. Kyle's face hardened. Proof? Ethan, who had quietly entered the room, spoke up. I told them everything. Kyle's eyes narrowed. You little... Enough! Marcus interrupted. Kyle, you're done here. Kyle's lips curled into a sneer. Good luck keeping this place inclusive, Marcus. Not everyone cares about your idealism. As Kyle stormed out, Marcus turned to the remaining staff. This stops now, and if I find out anyone else has been involved, you won't get a second chance. The next morning, Marcus visited his mother. She greeted him with her usual warm smile, but her eyes searched his face. You've been busy, she noted. Yeah, Marcus replied. There was more going on than I realized. She nodded, understanding without him having to explain. So, what's next? Marcus smiled faintly. We rebuild, stronger than before. Mrs. Monroe squeezed his hand gently. I know you will. And Marcus, for the first time in days, felt a sense of calm. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face the truth and change it. This chapter reveals a deeper issue within the restaurant, introduces a hidden antagonist, and sets Marcus on a path to not just confront, but change the culture within his business. Let me know when you're ready for the next chapter. The day of reckoning had arrived. Marcus Monroe stood in front of the large bay window in his office at Willow and Finch, watching the morning light spill onto the empty tables below. The restaurant was quiet now, but in a few hours it would be bustling with activity. Today wasn't just another day of service. Today the entire staff would face the consequences of what had been brewing beneath the surface. Andrea knocked softly before entering. Everyone's here, she said, her tone even but cautious. Marcus nodded. Let's do this. The entire staff was assembled in the dining area. Servers, cooks, hostesses, all standing with a mix of curiosity, nervousness, and unease. They knew something serious was coming. Marcus rarely called full staff meetings without reason. Marcus walked in, his presence commanding, yet his expression unreadable. Thank you for being here, he began, his voice calm but firm. This isn't your typical meeting. Over the past few days, I've learned something deeply troubling. The room was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of feet. There has been a pattern of discrimination in how some of our guests have been treated. Elderly patrons, people of color, and others who don't fit the mold of what some believe our clientele should be, have been given subpar service, ignored, and disrespected. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged worried glances. Others, like Ethan, looked down in shame. Marcus continued, his tone sharpening. This isn't who we are. This isn't what this restaurant stands for. And I won't allow it. Andrea stepped forward, holding a clipboard. We've spoken to several staff members, and we know who's been involved. Kyle, though gone, still had loyal followers within the staff. A few faces turned pale. Marcus didn't need to name names yet. The weight of his words was enough. Today is your chance, Marcus said, scanning the room. If you've been part of this, come forward now. I'm willing to offer a second chance to those who admit their mistakes and commit to change. But if you stay silent and we find out later, there will be no mercy. A tense silence followed. Then a young server named Jenna stepped forward, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. Kyle encouraged me to ignore certain tables. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to say no. Marcus nodded, his face softening slightly. Thank you, Jenna. Another server, Chris, followed. Me too. I didn't realize how wrong it was until I saw what happened with your mother. Slowly, a handful of others admitted their complicity. Andrea took notes, acknowledging each one. But a few remained silent, their expressions defiant. Marcus took a deep breath. To those who came forward, thank you. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you're willing to do better. We'll provide training, and you'll have a chance to earn back our trust. He paused, his eyes hardening. But to those still hiding, you're done here. Andrea began calling out names. One by one, they were asked to leave. A tall man named Eric, who had often laughed with Kyle, scoffed as he untied his apron. Good luck keeping this place afloat without us. Marcus didn't flinch. We'll manage. As the last person left, Marcus turned back to the remaining staff. This is our turning point. I want every person who walks through those doors to feel respected and valued. We'll rebuild, but we'll do it together. Later that afternoon, Marcus received a text from his mother. "Stopping by for lunch today. Hope that's okay." Marcus smiled and texted back, "Always." When Mrs. Monroe walked into the bistro, the staff immediately noticed. But today, something was different. Jenna hurried over with a warm smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Monroe. Right this way." She was seated at a prime table by the window, the best in the house. Chris brought her a menu and water without delay. Andrea personally took her order, ensuring every detail was perfect. Marcus watched from the kitchen, his heart swelling with pride and relief. When Mrs. Monroe finished her meal, Marcus joined her. "How was everything, Mom?" She smiled warmly. "Perfect. Not just the food, but the feeling. You've done well, Marcus." He nodded, a soft smile playing on his lips. "We're just getting started." As she left, the staff gathered for their shift briefing. Marcus addressed them one last time for the day. "What we do here matters. Every day is a chance to do better. Let's make sure we never forget that." The day ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Judgment had been delivered, and though there was still work to be done, Marcus knew they were on the right path. This chapter delivers the climax, where the truth is revealed, consequences are faced, and Marcus begins the journey of rebuilding his restaurant's integrity. Let me know when you're ready for the next chapter. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder that we all have the power to create change through our actions, our choices, and our voices. Let's continue to stand up for respect, no matter where we are. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the values that truly matter.